Again, just shoulders back, sternum up just a little bit. Couple releasing breaths, giving yourself full presence inside the room. If something's like really present for you right now, either in your thoughts or in your feelings, your thoughts or your emotions, just promise yourself that you'll go back and deal with it when the time's appropriate, and that right now it's probably not helpful to hang on to it. So again, it's not like you're suppressing. Just promise yourself, okay, I'm going to go back and deal with this when I have time, but I need to just kind of let myself free of it for a little while. We need to be able to start the conversation about, so what do you do when it's not working? I mean, we're talking about, again, your physiological imprint creates your reality, which creates your physiological imprint, which creates your reality. And so far, we've learned all about how that happens, and we've begun to really learn how you begin to switch it up, with the background that it's every moment that adds up. It's not the big things, it's the every moment. And so how do we begin to switch up all of those moments so we spend more of our time in life generating states? And again, it's not about suppressing, it's not about denying, it's not about pretending. It's not about pretending, because your body knows the truth, because it's more connected to that part of your brain that's beyond your awareness. Again, I don't like the word subconscious, because it's a good thing that there's a lot of our brain that's beyond awareness. It just kind of it's like automatic pilot. But sometimes the automatic pilot needs to go back and be reprogrammed, like those planes that have just been crashing lately. Some pretty bad programming going on there. So all of your brain can be reprogrammed, and what we're talking about now is how do you go and start to reprogram that automatic pilot. So we've talked about ways to do it in every day, 3-to-1 ratio, micro moments, attention to attention, cementing the good. We've talked now about some tools where you're automatically, intentionally trying to create and engage your calm and connection system. One of the ones that we talked about way back was attitude breathing, or in the book is called heartful breathing, where when you're in a place, say you're nervous about taking a test, and instead of getting caught up in that nervousness, okay, I'm just going to breathe calm. I'm just going to breathe calm. Because that switch in your physiology, the switch in your thoughts, begins to change your state, so you really do become more calm. The one that I gave you on Monday was heart in the moment. And I had you write a list of images. And the steps, again, for all the heart tools are notice, refocus, nurture. Notice is disengage. Just notice when you're being reactive and disengage. Refocus your physiology, because again, your physiology determines your emotion. And then intentionally engage in a different emotional state. So I had you write your list of images, and it doesn't have to be off of that list. But the idea there of the third step is, instead of just calming yourself down like present moment awareness or power of pause, it's intentionally taking another step. Because remember, you are your synapses, and I'm going to revisit that a little bit today. You are your thought patterns. But it's not about the thought patterns where you're trying to think positive and you really don't believe it. You are your authentic thought patterns. So how do we begin to switch those up? So again, it's like, hopefully over the whole semester, you're just building a bigger and bigger and bigger toolbox. Because I can't impress enough, it's not just about the moment. It's about what you're creating in the long term. We see functional changes in our brain and our whole body, actually, which means the moment-to-moment changes. But we also see structural changes in your brain. That's pretty big. You actually change your brain structure by intentionally being different. And again, it doesn't work if you're suppressing, it doesn't work if you're denying, it doesn't work if you're thinking positive and you really don't believe it. It doesn't work if you're blaming and shaming yourself for being reactive. It has to be an authentic shift. So today we're going to start a kind of a harder, deeper conversation about what happens when it's not working. You've done the power of pause, you've done present moment awareness, you've even tried heart in the moment, and no matter what you do, there's still something coming up. And you're carrying it a lot. It may be a reactivity that comes up a lot for you, and you would be a lot better off without that routine reactivity. It could be a major thing that you're carrying and carrying and carrying and can't let go, and don't realize why you can't let go. And the more you try to suppress it, it's like a buoy, right? You know, trying to push a buoy underwater. Is it going to stay down? No, it's just going to keep popping back up. So what do we do then? What do we do when something below the chart starts to come up for us? So I'm going to tell you a little bit of a story, and I'm just kind of intersperse her story through this because it's a good representation. And again, if I ever tell stories in classes that's not either about me or my kid, well, my kids give me permission to, then it's somebody that's already given me permission to tell stories, because sometimes I include those stories in the books that I write. So Kendra was a young woman, and her mother wasn't present in her life, and her father or her grandmother was really her primary caretaker, and had been her primary caretaker for most of her life. And so now Kendra's older, she's in college, and her grandmother's getting older and she's getting sick, and she wants Kendra to come by and take care of her. And she can't do it. Kendra can't do it. She's angry that her grandmother would be asking her for this. She's really reactive. Then she's got the part of herself that hates herself because she can't do that for this woman that's been here for her most of her life. She's got all these complicated emotions around all of this stuff. She hates herself. She's mad at the demands from her grandmother. She thinks she's overwhelmed with school. She's overwhelmed with all the other stuff going on in her life. And she's got all these really complicated emotions around all of this stuff. So what do you do then? You know, she comes to school and she's trying to focus, but she's got this recurring thing coming up of either shame around it all, or, you know, frustration, anger, and she knows that the frustration and anger is probably way out of context for the situation. And I want you to just think right now, just kind of think about you and your own life. I know this is a really singular example, but the truth is we all have those situations in our life where somebody is maybe asking something from us, or somebody is expecting something from us, and we're really reactive around it. And we think that the reactivity may be warranted or not warranted, but we really don't understand why we're. So I'm going to kind of talk about her process and how she worked through this as we went along. So again, what we're talking about now is, so what do you do with the bottom of the chart? Because again, it's not just about pretending the bottom of the chart doesn't exist. So remember again, if you have that, I'm going to give you just a minute, and if you have that chart, get out the chart. What do you do with the bottom of that chart? Now the thing is a lot of different programs or traditions of thought will tell you that the top is positive and the bottom is negative. And I purposely don't use the terms positive and negative for that reason, or good and bad, or the bottom of the chart is something that we need to suppress, or the bottom of the chart are some traditions call afflictive emotions. Those are the bad things. And what I'm trying to invite you into, and this is a much deeper conversation, that maybe those things aren't the bad things. Maybe, number one, they're understandable, and number two, for healing, because number three, there's something that has kind of been programmed into us. But the way to heal them isn't to pretend you don't have them, and it's not to suppress them. It's not to judge them, and it's not to judge yourself for having them. Because guess what? All those states just bring you below the line again. Now, having said that, there is a truth that if you are totally consumed by those emotions all the time with unrelenting, that those become your way of being. Again, it is true that you are a system of adaptation, but it's not helpful to pretend those things don't exist. It's not helpful to pretend that or judge them for being bad. So we're going to talk about how you hold both of those, because both are true. It is true that if you exist in those emotional states below the line more often than not, then that becomes your way of being. Again, and this isn't a value judgment. It's not anything. It's just the truth of our science is you adapt to what you are, or you adapt to your experience. So if that's your experience, more than not, that's what you're going to adapt to. And again, there's no value judgment in that. That's just scientific reality of how adaptation works. So again, what do I always say? Shift when you can, heal when you can't. Because sometimes we can't. Like for Kendra, that was coming up so strong in her, she needed to figure it out. Because she was really angry. She was angry with herself, she was resentful, she was totally overwhelmed. And again, I know that's a singular example, but you all have some kind of examples of the way those things play out for you in your life. So shift when you can, heal when you can't. What does that mean? When you can go above the line, but it's got to be authentic. It has to be authentic. Again, sometimes I can be walking to class, and I can be just as easily thinking about all the things that are going wrong, will go wrong, as the things that are going right. As noticing the things that are going right. Or noticing the hawk that was flying over me this morning as I was walking. It was beautiful. Right? But sometimes, and again, that's why the 3-to-1 ratio can be so helpful, because nobody expects you to be there all the time. And sometimes honesty about what's going on when something below the line comes up is absolutely necessary. And again, that's why I don't term them as positive and negative. I'm very careful about not doing that. So again, shift when you can, heal when you can't. When you can, and again, I know all your words are different. These are just examples. There are no right and wrong. Shift when you can, heal when you can't. When something is coming up below the line, it's not about suppressing, it's not about denying, and it's not about judging those emotions or judging yourself. But it's also not about taking off with them or staying in those states way too long than what's helpful. And again, I'm not saying don't ever be in those states. I'm not saying that at all. Sometimes you just need to be sad, or sometimes you just need to be angry. Sometimes you just need to work through grief, and that's okay. Just understanding the science of where you are more often than not creates the capacity for more of the same. Takes the value judgment away from it. Okay, so I want to go back a little bit and talk about why I think, not I just think, but my argument about why the bottom isn't bad. So I'm going to go back and just remind you a little of the brain science. Remember, you have this little deep thing in your brain called your amygdala that records every experience you've ever had, right? So that's how you get programmed to judge what is threat, what is fear. Remember, we're just talking stress as emotional disequilibrium. When you feel good, you got a lot of equilibrium going on. When you feel bad, you're knocked off of that equilibrium. That's what stress is. It's a really global term. So how we perceive what stress is, is determined by things that are throwing us off balance, which is all determined by our programming. It's all determined by our programming. That's why one person can perceive something as stressful and somebody else perceives something totally different as stressful. It's all determined by your programming. And all that programming takes place in the deepest parts of your brain. So stay with me on this, because I'm coming back to the chart. So then, not only do you see your whole world and you perceive your whole world, you make judgments, you make meaning. The way you make meaning of the world you see is because it's filtered through the world of experience that you have recorded in your brain. And it's just neural wiring. I know that sounds kind of blandly scientific, but it's true. All the events of your life are over. It's just neural wiring. The problem is the second piece of that is a lot of people will say, okay, the event's over, just get over it and move on. And you can't. It's neural wiring. It's wired in your brain. And that's the programming that you make sense of your whole world from. Right? So, and so the meaning that you make is really important. It's not about pretending it's not there. It's about rewiring a new paradigm, and I'll talk about that a little bit more as we go further into it. But, so you have a perception, and again, we've gone over this and over this, but that BRC right there are behaviors and reactions and choices. So at any given point in this spiral, what you're perceiving in your life, the meaning you're making, the physiological imprint that's reflecting your emotional state, it doesn't matter where you are in the spiral, you're having behaviors and reactions and choices that are consistent with what's going on with that spiral. Okay, so stay with me, because this becomes kind of important here. So you're wired to perceive meaning, and then from that wiring, you're exhibiting behaviors and reactions and choices, and those behaviors and reactions and choices might be just to feel depressed. It might be to feel numb. It might be to get angry. Let's look at some of the words below the chart. And again, I know that yours are all different. If you have your chart, look at your chart. So I would argue that everything that you wrote below the line on the chart is either a result from some past hard experience that you have had, or a behavior, reaction, and choice that you've adopted to negotiate that experience. And why I say negotiate that experience is, I mean, okay, numbness, right? After my son's accident with the helicopter and all that stuff, he was numb. The numb was a reaction because the numbness was protecting the scared part, right? So I would argue that everything below the line is either from, from the experience directly, or it's some behavior, reaction, and choice that you've adopted to try to negotiate that experience. And again, that experience may not even be a cognitive experience. It's just something that we've been programmed. So we've been programmed, or we've been programmed to believe that people don't like us, or we've been programmed to believe that you don't belong, or you've been programmed to believe that people are judging you, or you've been programmed to believe that, your parents don't think you're good enough, or you're never going to be smart enough, or whatever it is. Again, I would argue that it's either the original experience or it's your programming from that, the behaviors, reactions, and this. So usually what happens when we're reactive and something below the line comes up is we think that's not okay. So we try to suppress it. And guess what? Suppressing doesn't work because, again, 80%, some people even say 90% of what happens in your brain is beyond your awareness. So if the part of your brain that's aware is just trying to suppress something, it's not going to work. It's still going to be there and it's still going to be doing what it does. The only way to change it is to really go to the source and change it. Okay, so we might suppress it. We might just take off and react with it. So we might get angry, we might get jealous, we might feel abandoned, we might feel insecure, we might feel judged, we might feel, socially inept, we might feel people don't like us, we might feel people are judging us, we might feel we're not good enough, or might feel whatever, all the reasons, right? And then we kind of just get totally absorbed in that. Either the feeling of adopted from it. The behavior we've adopted from it might be, again, anger, jealousy, abandonment. I mean, there's a ton of them. Fear, anxiety. There's as many as we can keep naming. But if we stay in those states too long, and again, I'm not saying those states are bad, but I'm saying if we just stay stuck in those states, then we're just creating the capacity for more of the same. So stay with me, because it gets kind of a deeper conversation here. Because it's like, how do we begin to address that stuff without being in it so long that it just creates the capacity for more than the same, but also that we're not suppressing it? So another thing that we might do is we might blame and shame ourselves for having those feelings in the first place. Oh, I shouldn't do that. I'm in stress management. I'm supposed to think positive all the time, right? So then you start beating yourself up and shaming yourself. And guess what? Blame, shame, and judgment, they're all below the line. So there is no question that the physiological state of healing is above the line, and a physiological state of degeneration is below the line if you're there too long. Not that if you're there at all. It's just if you're there too long. So the question again is shift when you can, heal when you can. It doesn't mean pretend they don't exist, but it means heal when you can. So how do you begin to do that? Go straight to that source. Because again, it's different parts of your brain. The part of your brain that's going to try to think positive when you really don't believe it. The part of your brain that believes things, that makes meaning. I talked at the very beginning of the semester. It's neurally stronger and quicker. You can't talk yourself out of it. I think I gave you the example of when I'm walking down the street and I see a snake and, I totally react and I'm scared and and I look down and it's a stick. I don't calm down right away. It takes me a long time to calm down. It was always a stick, but it takes me a long time because that emotional part of your brain is stronger. There's more neural connections, and it had to be to keep our species alive. It's a good thing. It's just that most of the time we live there too long. So the idea is we need to go back to the source, right? It's like, I love it. It's like, there's a woman's walking along the street and she sees a guy and he's like looking and looking and looking and looking, and she says, what's wrong? And he says, I can't find my keys. And he's, I don't know what I'm going to do. They're my car keys. I can't find them. And she says, oh my gosh, I'll help you look. And they're looking and looking and looking. She says, okay, maybe this will help. Where is the last time that you had them? And he said, oh, over there. And she said, well, why are we looking here? And he said, because that's where the light is. And that's kind of what we do with that, right? We go to the light part of your brain, the part of your brain that is kind of conscious, thinking that we're going to find those keys. And the key is really at the place that's beyond our awareness, that source. We need to go to that source. So what does that mean? Again, your whole brain, whether it's the part of your brain that's beyond awareness or the part of your brain that's within awareness, is all made up of neural nets. It's not just the awareness part of your brain. Your whole brain is made up of this is a single neuron, but they connect together in these nets, and these nets carry meaning. So again, the events of your life are over, but you have these behaviors or choices that you've adopted that are keeping you below the line. They're coming up strong. For Kendra, it was coming up as a whole lot of reactivity, anger and resentment and self-blame and shame, and that was all her neural nets firing. And the only way to go back is to begin to change what those neural nets are doing. Because again, all the events are over. The only place that you're going to be able to change those reactivities is by changing your neural nets. It's the only place. And there's a lot of hope because we know you can do that now. We didn't used to know that you can do that before. You know, and this was actually, I mean, in the time of science, it was actually a fairly recent discovery. It was only in the mid-1990s that we realized that you could change your brain by incorporating different experience. It was like the hugest finding in neuroscience ever, because we had the medical technology to be able to look inside brains, and we had people that were intentionally trying to be different. We used to think that once you were an adult, that's it. You're hardwired the way you're hardwired. You're going to be that way. You can be a little happier, a little sadder, but it's just going to be the way you are. And now we know that's not true. Now we know if you change your experience, you can change what's programmed. It's like those planes that are crashing. Their automatic pilot wasn't good. It was a bad programming automatic pilot. I don't know if you know about this. So there were a couple plane accidents, and they found out that what was wrong was actually the programming in the automatic pilot. And the real pilot kept trying to correct it, but the automatic pilot was kicking in, and these planes crashed, and everybody on board died. 2 of them. So what they found out that it wasn't, so it's like the pilot was the conscious part of the brain, the automatic pilot is the unconscious part of the brain. You have to go back and reprogram what's going on in the again, the part of your brain that's beyond awareness. I don't even like subconscious because people don't think that you can't do anything. So again, you are your synapses. You are your synapses. So if you react the way you've always reacted, if you keep kind of evaluating or bringing meaning the way you always have, that's just going to stay what's there. So now we know that there's ways to actually unlock what's going on the way your neural nets connect. So this is kind of the key to how almost all healing does. And again, when I use the word healing, I mean all kinds, little, big, right? If you have something that holds you back because you think you're not good enough, that's something somewhere that got wired that makes you believe that, and it would help to rewire something. So I'm using the word healing for that. So don't turn it off, just think, oh, I don't need healing. It's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about rewire function better for you. And you need to be in the physiological state to have that happen. Again, the physiological state of healing is above the line. So stay with me a little bit with this. So if you can think about why your brain does what you do, what it does. Because when I start talking about the amygdala, the first thing people do is start beating themselves up. Oh gosh, my amygdala is just, and I have a horrible amygdala and it's just wired with all this experience. And that doesn't help either. The idea is to understand that that process is good. The process of your amygdala is just trying to keep you safe. And you may have adopted some behaviors that aren't very healthy for you right now, but at some point, your amygdala's job was trying to keep you safe, and it does its job very well. So if you can begin to look at the things below the chart as either an experience that your amygdala has that wasn't very, it wasn't a very good experience for you in the first place, or as a behaviors, reactions, and choices aren't necessarily bad, because those are the things that are trying to protect you from the deeper hurt of the original experience, if that makes any sense. So somebody that has an experience where they feel like they're being judged a lot, and then they just get reactive or angry or defensive, guess what? It makes total sense. The defensiveness masks the hurt underneath. So when you can look at that, instead of judging yourself, instead of blaming yourself, shaming yourself, and just go, oh my gosh, it totally makes sense. You're not taking off with it isn't good either, because it just perpetuates it. But the thing is when you're in a state where you can show some self-empathy of understanding, so show some self-compassion, guess what? You're in the physiological state of healing at the same time that you're able to work on rewiring some of those things that are below the line. Is that beginning to make sense? This is just kind of we're just beginning. This is some kind of deep conversation. So what do you do? How do you do that? You engage the neural net just enough to open it up. And then you destabilize it by offering some kind of mismatch. So if you destabilize it by not responding in your typical way, it's like, whoa, I'm really reactive, I'm really angry right now, instead of watching yourself be angry. Oh, I get it. That makes sense. I'm not going to take off with it. I'm not going to suppress it. I'm just going to kind of be mindful of it from a disengaged way. Guess what? You're offering it a mismatch. You're not responding in the way that you usually do. And then you create a different association by choosing a different authentic behavior. Okay, so it's unlock it enough, create a mismatch, create a different association. Offer a mismatch, create a different association. So how did that work out with Kendra? Right? She started doing this, and I'm going to have you do a writing assignment this weekend that's a little deeper, and I'm going to post a reading and have you do some writing assignments. And so I kind of want to set this up so you know what those assignments are going to be. But when she did this, it's almost like you're observing yourself with the reactivity. So you're not re-traumatizing yourself, or you're not re-experiencing it, because what does that do? That just perpetuates the neural nets. But if you can it's almost like you're observing yourself. Sometimes I say, I had a student once that just imagined a twin telling how they felt, or a best friend, but that best friend was really them. What happened when Kendra did this, it was like, oh my gosh. What came up for her in that story was how abandoned she felt by her mom. It didn't have anything to do with her grandmother, because her mom had left when she was young. Whoa, that was a big surprise, because all she was angry at her grandmother and overwhelmed and all that kind of stuff. That was a huge surprise for her. And then she realized that part of that I don't even want to try to help was because her grandmother was sick. She was afraid her grandmother was going to die. She was afraid her grandmother was going to abandon her just like her mom did. And once she could hear her own story, again, she didn't re-experience, but she could just hear it from a kind of a disengaged point of view. If you can do that from a self-compassionate light, right, an understanding light, you're in the physiological state of healing. You unlock the neural nets enough, offer a mismatch, create a different association. That's how neural nets get rewired. Okay, that's how neural nets get rewired, and this is really kind of a deeper process, and that's kind of why I wait this long into the semester. But you're going to be doing a reading on this and really be kind of walking yourself through this whole process. So I'm going to give you a reading this weekend, and there's going to be an exercise for self-empathy. Now, okay, so let's talk about empathy and compassion, because a lot of people get those mixed up. And what you're going to do is create of self-empathy and self-compassion for yourself when you're experiencing something below the line, because that unlocks the neural nets and trains them with something else, even when you're feeling numb, even when you're feeling depressed, and it's like it just gives you a whole different way to address that without blame, shame, judgment, suppressing, or pretending it doesn't exist. So what you're going to do is I'm going to ask you to just let any kind of image surface, and it doesn't even have to be, if it doesn't feel comfortable to do an image of yourself, that's totally fine. This doesn't have to be factual memory. The way your neural nets work is it's just the feeling state. So some people can just, if it just feels too strong, then you can just do a representative image. Have you guys ever seen the movie Inside Out? Yeah, all those little characters. It's like that. You're just going to kind of observe one of those little characters inside of yourself telling their story. So it doesn't have to be you. It can be a twin, it can be a friend, it can be a little character, it can be a cartoon character. But your job is to listen to an engaged point of view. Empathy is just fully listening. Compassion, then, is what you do to be able to help somebody. They're two different things, and people get them confused a lot. So then I'm going to ask you from a self-compassionate light what that best friend or what that twin or what that little image, cartoon image, really needs to heal. Either needed now, needs now, or needed then. And then if you really want to get into this, and I would encourage you to, if you have something that you feel comes up a lot for you, then there's actually a practice where you imagine yourself receiving that thing that you need. And again, this is key, hugely key in the next several practices, is that your brain doesn't know the difference between something that's vividly imagined and something that's real. Let me say that again. Your brain doesn't know the difference between something that's vividly imagined and something that's real. Two pieces to that. First, what do we do usually? We just imagine all these stuff that is going wrong, can go wrong, will go wrong. We play all these things in our head. Your brain doesn't know the difference. Your brain thinks it's really happening. But the opposite can be true too. And the opposite can be when you go back and you can actually kind of replay things in your head in a place of healing, your brain doesn't know the difference with that either. And so you can actually go back and heal your emotional meaning around circumstances, which comes from a different place than your autobiographical memory. Autobiographical memory is the details you remember. That stays the same, because a lot of people say, I don't want to forget. You don't forget, but you retrain the emotionalism around it. Like Kendra, when she realized, wow, I'm not really angry at my grandmother. I'm not really resistant. I'm still holding on to some stuff around my mom, and I'm still holding on to a lot of fear around that. She was able to be present with her grandmother in a whole new way. And then she even took it one step further, and once she realized that she was doing that, she realized her grandmother was doing the same thing. Her mom not only abandoned her, she abandoned her grandmother. So her grandmother was always afraid that Kendra was going to leave her like her daughter left her. So their behavior wasn't even about each other. And once they could realize that, then they could just be real with what was going on, rather than see it through this meaning that we prescribe. So the second part to that, your brain doesn't know the difference between what's vividly imagined and what's real, is you can go back and you can actually heal some memories just by offering a different imaginary experience.
So what you're going to be doing this weekend as your assignment is you'll be doing several different things. First thing that I want you to do is I want you to read chapter 5 in From Mindfulness to Heartfulness. It just starts with giving you a review of the heart tools so you understand them at a deeper level. And then the second part of the chapter goes into the practice called Heart for Healing and how and why you actually heal at a neural level when you give yourself a different experience. And again, this time in the practice Heart for Healing, it could just be an imaginary experience because your brain doesn't know the difference. So I want you to read that thoroughly. Then the second thing that you're going to be doing is you're going to be reading an assignment that's actually posted on Blackboard. So you'll just click the link and get that reading. And that reading goes through the whole self-empathy and self-compassion exercises that I just talked about. You will actually, in that reading, it shows you how to do those exercises, and it's really important that you do those separately, because self-empathy, again, is just fully witnessing yourself as a different image. It could be a best friend, it could be a twin, it could be you at another age, it could be a total representative image like the images in the movie Inside Out. It could be anything, but the idea is to be disengaged from it. So you can just fully listen without being consumed by the emotion, fully listen without from a disengaged or witnessing point of view. But it's really important that you fully witness first. So that's the exercise of self-empathy. And then what you're going to do is you're going to do the next exercise, which is self-compassion. And in that exercise, what you do is you're letting that image, and again, an image of you or a twin or a best friend or something that kind of represents you and your experience, but not necessarily so much so that it's going to be consuming you and your emotion. It's really important that you do this from a disengaged witnessing point of view. The exercise from self-compassion is letting that image tell you what they need, either need now or needed then, because then the practice will lead you through in your imagination, giving that image the emotional content of what that need is. So it's really important that you do the pieces. And again, it's all self-explanatory in the reading. So you're going to go through and read and do the exercise on self-empathy. You're going to do the exercise on self-compassion. And then once you have done both of those, and it's important to do both of those first, then you'll go through the practice. Now I have two options the way that you can do the practice. It's a guided audio called Heart for Healing, which I will post, and you can go through it that way. Or you can read the way it's written, either in From Mindfulness to Heartfulness, that's called Heart for Healing, or in the posted reading that's called Heart for Holding and Healing Self. It's pretty much the same practice. It's just developed a little bit more in the posted reading. And so you can just read it through and then do it on your own. So you can do it by guided, or you can read it through and then just do it quietly on your own, kind of leading yourself through, whichever way feels more appropriate for you. So what you're going to turn in is you're going to turn in one long reflection with 3 very clearly labeled pieces. The pieces are going to be the self-empathy exercise, the self-compassion exercise, and then several paragraphs just on your experience with doing the practice. And again, it's your choice how you do the practice. You can do it on your own quietly, you can do it guided, you can even read it and record it yourself and then actually lead yourself through if you like. That's kind of a total different option. But so what you will again turn in is just one long reflection. It'll be longer than a page this time, but one long reflection with those very 3 distinct labeled parts. So have a really good week.